Welcome everyone to Brunel University London, virtually at least. It's great to see familiar names, old friends, and new names in the gallery view here of people joining us tonight. This is a session connected to a second year English module at Brunel called Contemporary British and Irish Fiction, that our second years are studying, and I'm co-teaching that with the novelist and academic Helen Cullen, who joins us here tonight too. I think it's such a privilege really for our students and for the rest of us tonight to hear a writer talking about her work, to give us a bit of an insight into the work in practice, and it's great for our students, I think, to get a bit of a view of that up close. So what we're going to do is Elaine and I will chat for a while here. If you have questions, there'll be time at the end for everyone to ask questions. I'm just going to kick off then, Elaine, with the official welcome, and to say it's just a real pleasure for us to have you here, for me to introduce you. Elaine, as I'm sure everyone here knows, is a prize-winning poet, novelist, playwright. We're going to talk mostly, I think, about her novel published last year, this beautiful novel in cover and content, As You Were. Those of you who've looked into Elaine's work will know that really her themes are kind of a short list of my favourite topics to discuss, really. So memory, Irish women, national identity, the role of state institutions. I'm sure we're going to get onto some of those tonight. I think, Elaine, if you're happy, we're going to kick off with a little reading from the novel, just to give those who haven't had a chance to read it yet a flavour, and to remind those of us who have what we're going to be talking about this afternoon.
Hi Claire, I'm delighted to be here, and a special hi to Helen as well, so thanks so much for including me in your course. But yeah, so I'm going to kick off with a piece. I was just saying to Claire before we came on that I've been doing some book clubs, and at one recently a woman said to me, she said there was a part in the novel where I identified with the main protagonist, Sinead, and I actually began to understand her. And of course, in my competitive spirit, I went guessing the part, and I was completely wrong all the time. And she said, no, it was the part where she spoke about her childhood and how the animals that they'd reared on the farm were given away. And she said, I think that led in some way to her disassociation with life. And I said, you're exactly right. That's very, very, very good. So I'm going to actually read that part. I've never read it before. So it's just where Sinead is actually, she crashes on a hospital ward. So it's a first person narrator, and this is the part where she crashes on the ward and she's imagining her childhood, which she goes back into regularly throughout the novel. Now the heel of a hand bangs me and I've pissed myself again. I want to pull a face. I consider diving one last time. Oh, sir, look, sir, I have her notes. She never returned. She said she was moving, would get treatment elsewhere or something. Okay, he says, charge again. But I can do the dead man's float forever. I'm gathering up some Connemara ponies in the railway field. They usually run with a couple of older horses or a donkey to calm them down. The ponies dart among the heavier horses. No good for anyone now. Stumbling legs slowing them down. Heavy swollen hocks from wallops of the stone walls. Old hunters. But the sun still shines on their dappled rumps and over the strawberry-roan arches of their backs. Sheep run with them, pick and graze, shiny greased maggots wriggling at their back openings as the soil is heating up with fine weather. These dark grey ponies will turn a snow white as time goes on, and after they've left us, I'll no longer recognise them. That's if I'm ever fortunate enough to come across them again. But I rarely am fortunate. I'm not there to watch them turn into reliable ponies for kids with ribbons in their hair who do ballet or play piano in Devon or Shropshire. Father always sold the stock without ever telling me, so there were no goodbyes. We never got one to keep. We broke them, bridle, bit, saddle, rider, ground poles, cross poles, stone walls, and then they moved on. He sold them to a Rose Cottage or Amble Lane Farm, far from the rough west of Ireland with its gates rusty and unhinged, squeaky and cumbersome like the people, but necessary. swinging this way and that with yellow baling twine, gates needing a good lift from the lower rung to open and shut. In the end, I stopped loving the animals when they'd arrive as young foals, plucked giddy and frightened from their mother. We simply worked them, and eventually we all stopped calling them by their names, referring to them by colour. And when a fancy horse truck would arrive in the yard with a yellow reg to collect them, I'd hide out under the bed. I never said goodbye. This, father said, made us tougher, but later it made loving harder, because I was always ready to just let go.
Thanks, Elaine. Thank you so much. It's a reading that I think invites the first question, really, which is maybe many people here will know you as a poet first, and that kind of transition, that kind of maintaining the kind of language of poetry into the novel is so important, I think. But also, I guess I'm interested practically, was it a strange thing to do, to move into that form of writing? Did it feel like it was necessary for this narrative?
Yeah, it did. I just couldn't tell the story that I wanted to tell. It was sort of seeping out of me, as you were, in all sorts of mad, intrusive spurts. And the poetic form was way too restrained for where I was going with it, I think. And I had gone into poetry very, wide-eyed and years ago, and I was using it as a political tool to change the world. I soon gave that up, but that was a long time ago. So I didn't really realize that I was transferring the ear or the sounds of a poet into the novel. Maybe I was very naive. I thought I was writing like perfectly coherent fiction narrative, linear narrative, and it turns out I might not have actually achieved that. So it was different. What I found very different was just actually just plot and time and pacing and characters, all the, I suppose, components of a novel that I forgot I'd have to, think really hard about. I remember saying to my editor once, she said, Elaine, it's set over 7 days, but you have to be careful with the timing. And I was like, oh, does it really matter? And she was like, yes, it really does matter. And, so it was a challenge, and it was a different type of work, I think.
Yeah, I mean, the timing's a really interesting question, isn't it? Because in a sense, of course, the novel's going over those 7 days, but there's so much more in terms of going back, that you're dealing with in the novel. And I wonder, just even that, how was that to kind of manage, to sort of think about, the section that you're reading from, to go back into to Sinead's childhood memories, or to the kind of various traumas that kind of come back through the novel. You're balancing lots of different time periods, aren't you?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think I kind of wanted it to be this sort of Greek chorus idea. So a sort of, I often wonder, was like, it's set in a hospital, and illness and sickness is a very important theme in the novel. But I think I'm always looking for sort of cave-like spaces. I find I'm even doing that now again with something. I'm always looking for these places where I push people into, so that they're in these unusual situations. And then they tell stories, because I know that some people will say that it seems to be almost fantastical or far-fetched, the idea of these people all sitting around telling a story. But I grew up with a huge importance on the orality of language and storytelling, not reading books. So for me, for people to sit around in like at a bus stop, on a train, in a sitting room, in a kitchen, in a hospital, to tell stories would be very, very normal. So going back into the past wasn't actually as difficult once I knew who these people were, and they changed often for me. Jane particularly, she was very sticky and hardy in who she wanted to be. They changed, but their stories, yeah, they told me their stories, and it sounds very, lofty and mad, but they actually sort of did, and that's how I composed it, I think. But it did start out as about 13 almost auto-fiction chapters of Sinead in first person.
Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, it's interesting that you say that about the setting in particular. So for anyone who hasn't yet had a chance to read the novel, that important idea that it's happening all on this hospital ward, and it seems to me kind of such a perfect setting for that, right? Because, you know, that impossibility of not overhearing other people's conversations and the lack of privacy in that space.
Yeah.
You know, it's inviting you to explore that, right? That there is a sort of, everyone's revealed there, whether they want to be or not, aren't they?
Yeah, no, that's it exactly. I suppose it is the perfect space for it. And everybody, yeah, that's a beautiful way of putting it. Everybody is revealed in those moments. And I think in those moments of illness, we are revealed. We're revealed to ourselves, I think. And I wrote the novel after a very protracted illness that lasted 18 months and very long spells of time on a hospital ward. So it would be only natural, I suppose, that all this auditory musings and mumblings would come out in some sort of a form and eventually be battered into a novel shape, maybe.
Yeah, absolutely. One other thing that occurs to me at this point is that one of the things our students are thinking about a lot is, you know, where does a text fit in the time and place that it's written? And I think that, you know, the novel is captured a really important moment, right? It's capturing that sort of, you know, had it been a few years different, that, you know, the fact that it needs to be kind of pre-repeal for Margaret Rose's daughter's story to make sense, that it needs to be kind of post-Celtic Tiger for the hospital falling apart to make sense. You know, I wonder if you could just, if it's not too kind of for our students' essays, you know, answer that a little bit, that it kind of
that's it. That's absolutely, yeah, that's really important actually, is the timing of it. So you're right, set between marriage equality, post the Celtic Tiger, so it's a crash again, and a really desperate crash, you know, and a terrible economic crisis. And I mean, Ireland has had cycles and cycles of terrible economic crises, and only had a sort of this boom, which seemed awfully weird and unusual in itself. And I really haven't really fully dismantled that, or where my place was in that, because, you know, I'm a public sector worker and so on. But yeah, so it was before repealing the Eighth Amendment, and obviously, you know, the death of Savita Halappanavar in a hospital in Galway, and I'm from Galway, and I had my children in that hospital. That hit the world headlines, and it seemed to be a catalyst. Like we had pro-choice movements, and we had our small groups, and we were pushing and pushing, but that seemed to be a catalyst that sort of everybody, it just moved it into a very public space. And what happened then in those years, so particularly coming very close to the referendum, personally and also politically, I felt, and personally and nationally, there was this huge outpouring of sharing of stories by women. And I didn't even realize it. I don't know, was I fully conscious of it at the time, how it was affecting me. So I had my illness. I was out of hospital and I was recovering and I was at home. And what I noticed was a lot of young women, and women in general, all generations, were constantly on the radio and on TV and in the newspapers, sharing such intimate details of their private lives and their health, to try and enact change and to try and bring about a public consciousness that something has to change. And it was so frantic and it was so fraught. And the language in the novel, I think, reflects that. And I think it might have been a subconscious thing in me, if that makes sense. So you'd have conversations with groups of female friends and loads of conversations, and they were so charged. It was a very charged time, I felt. Yeah, personally, and like I said, nationally as well. And I think we're in Ireland, I think, and you know, other countries too. It's just in Ireland, it was the Catholic Church was the system through which oppression was meted out. And I think we were living in a time that the stories were starting to come out. So we were hearing about mother and baby homes. We were hearing about Magdalene laundries. We'd had these brutal reports around child sex abuse in institutions, which were just harrowing. And really terrible statistics were coming out. And I think repealing the Eighth Amendment was sort of this big watershed moment around so much pain, and somatic national pain, I think. So yeah, so I think that's where I think the novel really was born out of that, very much so.
And just so vital too that it was the narrative aspect of it, right? People telling stories. That was, you know, and with the marriage equality referendum, people telling stories about their experiences that kind of shifted public opinion in some way.
Yeah, and I wonder to what cost as well, you know. And you were hearing stories like, well, you know, we have a gay son or whatever, and it was as if I don't know, I got frustrated with a lot of that because I felt it was very unfair on certain individuals in communities that were already in difficult situations, and they had to share these stories, and it should have just been a human rights issue that we go to polls and we go to referendums for a lot of these issues. That's just in our constitution. So I suppose it was important to hear the stories of your neighbours, but we went from this space of not telling story, well, telling stories, but not telling personal, intimate body stories and sex stories around your sexuality or whatever, to suddenly lots of people were telling them. And yeah, so that's what I really wanted to investigate in the novel, is where a group of strangers meet up and tell the most intimate stories to each other, and what the fallout of that is, because there can be real positives out of something like that, but there can also be a lot more trauma on the individual, I think.
So is that something that that fiction, that a novel can do, you know, that non-fiction can't, you know, that in a way the novel allows space for these stories to be told and for the exploration of it, but not at the same personal cost maybe as these sort of revelations, or, you know, to kind of fix the data in a personal story, you know?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I suppose just to talk about the shift from poetry to fiction for me personally, the poem had become an intensely the eye of the poem, a very revealing space. And to tell a story like Jane's in the novel, with her relationship with Anne, for example, and with regards to opening up some sort of dialogue on the mother and baby home, particularly the one in Tune, because it's the one that I'm closest to. A fictional space, I suppose, with factual information, was a place where I could have different types of people respond. So there's that scene with Margaret Rose and Jane and Sinead where they're all discussing what happened, and they've different viewpoints on things like religion and so on. And I think in those spaces, people feel comfortable to talk far more openly. It doesn't become as polarized as, you know, obviously the internet and internet conversations and so on. And I think we have lost, in a certain way, those kind of spaces. So yeah, fiction was that space for me, because I'd heard all these stories, you know, hundreds of them, and I just wanted them recognized. But again, it could draw me back into a place where I could observe.
Mm, mm. And I guess it gave you space as well to, because there are layers of institutions in the novel, right? So
Yes.
the hospital in itself is an institution,
Yeah.
but there's this kind of incredible idea also of, can they see the cathedral from
the hospital?
And
yeah,
you know, and then the mother and baby homes kind of conversations, all of these, the institutions of marriage, the institutions of family, you know, it allows those conversations. I mean, I wonder if you could just talk about that a little bit too, that sort of the relationship of the individual within all of these institutions seems crucial in the novel.
No, it totally is. And I suppose the hospital is the one institution where you're most pared back. So you don't tend to have your status is your sickness, interestingly enough. And you know, and so that's the hospital situation. But you're correct. So they can see the cathedral. And I mean, there's so much bad history, to put it bluntly, even with the cathedral, and come back to a certain bishop that was Bishop of Galway going, and you know, he Bishop Casey, he had started the whole, I suppose, the church falling apart, because we had heard that he had a child outside wedlock and so on, and maybe wasn't as charitable as people would have liked or would have expected. The thing about the church and the institutions in Ireland is they are so in control of hospitals and schools and universities to a lesser extent, but still they have had a strong handle on, or you know, hold on them. And I'm not always fully sure when we're having conversations with each other if we actually realize, you know, that 90% of primary school education in Ireland is through the patronage of the Catholic Church. So I really did want to reflect something on institutions in the book, but I really also wanted to drill down into the microcosms of just the everyday life of these people, and how that played out in their personal agency, if that makes sense. So you can see, obviously, with Margaret Rose, she's in a very difficult marriage, so being an institution. With Jane, she's had that heavy hand of the church in all facets of her private life. But she's not fully connecting it either with what's happening. But if you move to Sinead, who's a woman in her late 30s, you know, she's also a product of some secrecy, keeping secrets, and is now again continuing on that tradition. So she's withholding the fact that she's terminally ill. And then that throws up a whole other moral question. But they're all very guarded with their outside world, I think. But with the world that's formed within the hospital, they do open up, because, like I said, they're all in dire straits and their backs are to the wall. So I suppose, yeah, I don't know, did I really answer about institutions? But yeah, they seem to be everywhere and quite claustrophobic.
Yeah, no, you absolutely did. And I guess there's that sort of, you know, the physical institutions, the idea of the kind of the spaces limiting the characters in various ways, and also so much in the novel about the experiences of shame, various types of shame that the characters feel.
Yeah.
Now, there's one particular aspect of this that I'm, you know, really, really interested in, especially in the novel, is the way that even when Sinead has this kind of this ultimate secret that she's maintaining, there is someone that she tells the secret to, and that's Google. So, you know, she confesses somehow to her laptop or her phone, or her search history would reveal the whole thing, right?
Yeah.
And I wonder about that as a kind of replacement. Maybe I'm stretching this too far, but you know, there kind of still needs to be this. Any kind of secret still needs some kind of outlet,
confessor.
Right?
Confessor. Yeah, no, you're totally on the money. No, that's really, yeah, she definitely, her confessional. So like, we would have grown up with the tradition of confession and the idea that you go to church, and from 6 years old you'd sit in a box and you'd tell your sins, and it was part of the culture and it was part of the tradition. It was bizarre, but it was what it was. And, you know, to me, it was bizarre. To other people, it could feel perfectly normal, but as a young child. But I think you're absolutely right. I think we swap hierarchies all the time. I think, you know, throughout history, culturally, we swap hierarchies. And Sinead does. She reveals so much to Google. So you were so right. So she's searching for answers from her phone, from Google. And I actually found that quite natural, weirdly. Maybe it's me, but I think we go into these deep dives. I say the Vanta black hole because I'm so interested in Vanta as blackness, but the Vanta black hole of the internet. So she goes down into this deep dive, and it's like it's bonkers, but it's also very relatable. You know, to me, it was very relatable. You know, and she was asking all about her illness, and then she'd go off on other tangents, as you do. About other ridiculous, nonsensical things. I don't think anyone's Google history should ever be revealed, but I have this fear that that's what's going to make up everybody's archive in another 50 years.
Your Google search history is a sacrosanct space of secrets. I mean, but it's so, you know, it's so poetic actually as well, I'm going to say, because that kind of movement from, you know, I'm trying to think I think it goes in both directions at points in the novel, that it starts with a kind of the mundane kind of, what should I eat when I feel ill, or kind of, you know, and you can see those things that you go through. You're kind of, you know, how do I write a will? And then you're looking at something about the thigh gap, and then you're looking about, because that's kind of how it works, right? Is that you're jumping, you know, through some of these kind of mundane things, and suddenly these really powerful, you know, questions that reveal something about the narrative.
No, you're so right. It gets darker and darker, and she I think she wonders at one stage about how much a soul weighs, and she really starts to, and it's really upsetting actually to watch her Google history, I think. But also she starts to rely less and less on it as she speaks more and more to Jane and Margaret Rose as well, which is at least reassuring, I think, because when she's at home on her own and she hasn't told anybody, she's really, you know, it's really coming undone. But you're so right. And I think what I wanted to do with this first person character, and it's not always the most pleasant reading experience, I don't think, but I needed this sort of brain to page idea that intrusive thoughts and thoughts from the past, and also thoughts from the internet, I think we're thinking very differently now. I don't know about anybody else on here. I have to throw my phone. It'll be enough for me just to throw my phone across this room, and I'll just work for 2 hours and not get up. But if it's beside me, I'll pick it up and I stim on it. Yeah. So I will ask it questions about, you know, how to start a new paragraph when you're stuck. So and I think it was risky to put in big long Google lists, because I have no doubt it'll some people will enjoy it and other people it will lose their interest, you know. A reader like my mother who scans for the plot will definitely just go, yeah, yeah.
Well, I mean, not that I want to argue with your mother, because obviously, but I mean, it just does so much, actually. I think it does so much. And I think I'm going to push it even further and say that it's not just the narrative of what she Googled, but it's also the devices themselves, right? So all of the patients, not quite all of the patients, but you know, they're on their phones or on their laptops, and there's simultaneously in the ward all of the work of religious iconography, right? The same kind of thing happens with the religious medals or the mass cards as what's happening with looking at the photos on the laptop. That there is a real kind of merging of those things, right? Is it Margaret Rose who has the slideshow of her family?
Yeah, of the daughter's wedding, and she plays it over and over again,
Yeah,
and there's bursting hearts coming out of it. And then you have the religious iconography, which is really is genuinely popular in Irish hospitals. I might have been one of the few beds not to have any, and I was actually given mass cards by some of the patients when I was in hospital. So you just feel out of duty. Well, I better be kind and polite. Yeah, but it still is a thing, definitely in the west of Ireland. Obviously the whole face of sickness and everything and hospitals has changed so dramatically. I mean, since the novel just was published, that, you know. But yeah, you're absolutely right. Everyone has something that they're grasping.
Yeah.
Everybody has something that they're grasping onto, and whether that is the internet or whether that is rosary beads or Shane with his laptop, whatever he is actually doing on it, whether he's just compiling this list for Sinead or whether he has himself also something that he's reading on it. They're all definitely grasping to something to find an answer, I suppose.
But it's the two things, isn't it? It's the kind of physically having something to kind of touch for comfort, but also having some kind of idea that this is a source to an answer.
Yes,
you know,
absolutely. Yeah,
I'm not kind of trying to say that prayer and Googling something are the same thing, but there's something kind of parallel, isn't there, in that sort of asking.
Well, I like the parallel of it. You're the first person who's ever interviewed me to draw that parallel. And they're asking something, and they're looking for an answer, I suppose. And it's not to put it crudely, it's just, it's obviously human behavior. So we're obviously, you know, this is obviously what we do. And I mean, that would have been very much my experience of hospital wards. There's a great intimacy among people, and there's phones and technology now. It used to be the TV in the corner of the room, but they're no longer there, and it's Wi-Fi and everyone's plugged into their own thing. And then when visitors come in, it's a whole other act. The patients nearly don't want the visitors because they bring something completely different in, and they kind of upset the space weirdly. And then when they leave, it's back into that intimacy again, and there's a very quickly a shared camaraderie with people that you ordinarily would have nothing to do with, but who interestingly all have quite similar habits in some ways, like you said.
Yeah, I mean, it's making me think also that the kind of distraction of those devices also explains, I think, or kind of, again, there's a parallel with, you know, Sinead's perspective, or the kind of interruptions of the memory and the kind of internal monologue are also very kind of contemporary in terms of kind of attention span.
Yes.
You know, that she can't kind of be in the moment, so she needs to be on her phone, or when she doesn't want time to think, because when she thinks,
it's intrusive, and it's not good. Yeah.
And that's true of maybe all the characters in a way, isn't it? That this kind of being forced into this space where you have nothing to do.
It's terrifying.
Yeah.
No, it is. It's terrifying because, ultimately, Sinead, who hasn't faced herself since she was a small child, and to be fair to her, feels, and she's a very complicated character, but she feels she's doing everything right. So she feels she's financially stable and helping the family. She has distanced herself completely from her 3 sons, which I know people find unusual, but I was interested in that mother figure who's providing and feels that she has done enough, because I think that she feels that if she pulls into the family situation, that she'll untopple it, and that she won't be a good influence. So she distracts herself, and just on that ward, then they're all stripped, and I mean that both, you know, like stripped physically and also metaphorically. and she particularly faces herself, I think. I think Jane can't. Margaret Rose is playing a completely different game. Hey, the men not so much, but Sinead is the one character who I suppose has to face herself in some way to get out of doom scrolling, to maybe halt for a while the intrusive voice, which, and you're right, it is definitely the short attention span, and I think I could have only done that with a first person narrator, which I'm shying away from for the second novel because it was really intense, the actual act of writing that and living in someone's head
to be
like
that.
that.
Yeah. Yeah. You raised the point there of the men on the ward are kind of operating in a slightly different, they're not in that collective in quite the same way, are they?
You surprised.
No, I'm just interested in, because there's a lot of, especially from Haig's daughter, isn't there? There's a bit of controversy even about the mixed ward, right? And there's kind of sense that there's something, again, that it's a failure of the hospital to, live up to kind of standards in a way that they're even allowing that to happen.
Yeah, and it is. I mean, we're not known for our tremendously effective health care system, sadly, and I think but and I have actually been on mixed gender wards, so that's not completely unusual, even though some people found that unusual. But I suppose never for the length of time you'd be moved out of it, or you'd be moving from one ward to another. But I needed to keep them there, so I suppose I pushed maybe the boundaries of fiction in that. Shane is an interesting character insofar as he says nothing, so he's like this silent witness. But it's the brother coming to talk to Sinead that's very important. I don't want to go into too much of that if people haven't read the novel, but he's also he's had a very difficult time also, and a very problematic mother figure. So it's all the different kind of facets of the family, I think, that play out on that ward. And you're right, Heggs is there, but he has this very overbearing daughter, and he seems to be this man who has never, like, because of the trauma of his life, he's never really fully grown or realized. There's been no kind of self-actualization or realization with Heggs, even though he's this politician, so he knows how to sort of act, but he's still not in control of himself. The daughter seems to very much control him, so I was interested in that dynamic.
Yeah, no, I think they're really fascinating, that kind of taking the politician out of the place where he has power.
Yes.
Putting him in the complete opposite of that, really. And the idea of kind of, as you, again, I don't want to add any spoilers either for people who have yet to read, but Shane witnessing and kind of coming to have this role that you're not expecting, I think is really powerful. It's making me think also about we've talked a lot about kind of positioning the novel as a sort of, I mean, you haven't been able to shake off the kind of political role here at all, have you? Right? This is a really, the novel is doing all those things.
Yeah.
And it's, I guess, no coincidence then that the healthcare workers that the patients are most often in contact with are immigrants.
Yes.
Australian, Polish, they're kind of, that's so important too, right? That there's a kind of reminder to readers however fragile the healthcare system is, it's who's holding it together.
Absolutely, and that was very important. That was very important to me, and it's a whole other face, I suppose, of Ireland in the last maybe 10 years, with exactly what you said, with the Celtic Tiger and the boom and so much economic migration, I suppose, into the country. But it hasn't really fully, I'm trying to think of novels now, but I don't know, has it really fully made its way onto the pages of novels yet? Of course, people might have set them 10 years ago rather than mine is in the very recent past. So maybe that's part of it. But it would definitely be the scene here in a hospital. And you're so right, they are holding it together completely. The Polish care assistant being one of the kind of greatest heroes, and also cracked, as we'd say here. He's a funny character. Like, I mean, I loved him, but he's funny in his own little way of creating his own hierarchy as well. So he's quite in control of that ward too, but he's very reliable as well. So he's very reliable, and I thought he was a funny guy, because I have conversations with these characters, and he was a funny one to have conversations with. But you're right, yeah.
Yeah, and he's the voice of reason when they need, a reality check as well, isn't he? At points.
Well, absolutely. And, I mean, when anyone has been in hospital for a time, I don't know, like, I presume nearly everybody has. So you arrive in and you're kind of nearly afraid to get up off the trolley and go to the bathroom without asking somebody. It's as if you've left all your scents and cop on at the door. Okay, especially if you're rushed in any sort of dramatic fashion. So I've been rushed in dramatic fashion. And like, you don't even realize you can actually put on a hoodie when you start to feel better, a pair of shoes, and go to the shop. And I noticed it was always these wonderful care assistants that were there all day long, working these incredibly long hours, that would get you all the things that you needed. So, you'd be kind of asking, where do I, and they'd say, we'll get it for you. And what's the Wi-Fi code, because, you see the doctors for 5 minutes in this mad flurry in the morning, and they're all very distracted by loads of things that are happening. And that's just the way it is. But these other people spend the day then in and out of your ward, and you can create, it becomes ridiculously intimate very quickly.
And I think so great though that you've made it clear that they have lives as their own, right? That their personal lives are kind of part of the conversation too, that they're not just these sort of figures who do the work for the patients.
Well, I don't know if that's a typically Irish thing, or I don't know if it's a typically Elaine thing, but I seem to like not be able to spend any time anywhere without getting a full story of someone I meet. So I don't know. I have this, maybe I extract all the information. A friend of mine said, yeah, you're just like an interrogator. I don't mean to be. So I'm not sure that that's the norm, but it was for me. I would find out a lot of the detail of people's families and so on. But then I ask an awful lot of questions.
Well, I mean, it's all for the good. I mean, while we're on the hospital, I suppose, as well, and those kind of connections with other places, especially for the students here who are thinking about this kind of the British and Irish fiction kind of context. Manchester plays a part in this novel because it's the place that Margaret Rose kind of arranges to send her daughter, and the city kind of exists as, or Britain,
a refuge.
It's a refuge. That's exactly the word I've written down.
No, it is a refuge. And I mean, it topples the narrative that I grew up with. So, grew up in west of Ireland, went to national school, and, we suffered 700 years of oppression, and then we were free. And that was the narrative in history class and so on. And we learned a lot about men, and great men and wonderful men, and lots of men's. I've written a lot about this, men's poetry, men's dramas, men's novels, and so on, and men's history. And I was so proud of all these wonderful men, that had fought for Ireland and so on. And I was totally unaware of the history of women. I don't know why, it just, like, I knew my grandmothers had existed and knew them very well in these really difficult lives that they both had. Well, one in particular, who had 11 children and, grew up in tough times. And I don't know what, like, it didn't click with me to consider, and I'm a history teacher, so it did start to click very quickly when I started to look at the curriculum and the course and so on. But that facet of it, I don't even think we fully explored it yet, where women did have to go, we'd use those euphemisms and we'd say things like take the boat or so on. And it's a very painful part of our history, I think, and it hasn't been fully explored yet. And you're right, Manchester exists as this space to save Margaret Rose's daughter, because she needs to be saved in this moment, like.
So yeah, it's a kind of a parallel medical space, isn't it, in one way? That is, that is invisible in a sense.
Yeah.
It's, kind of happens off stage, but it's, it's also a kind of safety. It's there. It's kind of easy. It's possible. In a way that's important. And I think the kind of shame can be kind of pushed off stage as well. In some
respects. Of course, when you don't see it, it didn't happen, and it's dealt with, and things are often dealt with. But I suppose what we find through any study in history, or any inquiry into any institutional abuse or whatever treatment of women in Ireland, or in anywhere, to deal with something, it's never dealt with. So you can see with Jane, it was dealt with. Jane's situation was dealt with, for better or worse, by an oppressive patriarchy. But it was never her how she felt, or her pain, or what was going to happen to her in later life. She's fallen apart as an individual in society. None of her children are talking to her. She's unable to articulate anything. And obviously she's suffering from vascular dementia, but she has moments of intense lucidity. But that pain comes out, you know, it's like that. I don't know if you're familiar with the book, The Body Holds the Score, Bessel van der Kolk. It's a brilliant book. I actually read it after I'd written As You Are, and I was like, oh, this really fits with part of the characters. But it's about, you know, the body holding the trauma, the pain, and so on. And I think we see that very much with all of the characters in a way, particularly the female characters, and particularly Jane and Sinead. But you're right that that space is a hospital space, and that Manchester space is also a clinical space, but it's off stage. So if this were a play, it's off stage, so it can be dealt with. You know, and he's a wonderful character. I think Margaret Rose's brother Jim. I think he's quite a solid individual, and I liked him as a character. You know, he got a job to do, and you know, he kind of did it properly.
Yeah, I mean, he's it's definitely a kind of those kind of quiet heroes who are also not written down in history, right? The people who kind of do the organising or follow through the tasks. I mean, all that is there, Elaine, is really making me think of, again, that idea of fiction filling in the gaps that history leaves. Yeah. You know, because these characters, they do, you know, they're having the conversations that are not said aloud, or kind of there's a privacy in the hospital ward that allows them to, you know, admit to one another what they haven't said to their kind of closest friends, or, you know, the things that Sinead can't say to her husband, she says one way or another here, right?
Well, absolutely. See, there's approved narratives, and I suppose, you know, as an academic, and you have so many wonderful post-its in my book, you know, you're using, I mean, very trustworthy.
For the purposes of the camera, I display my own.
Look at this even from an academia position. To try to tell these histories, for me, as both like you know, I'm really interested in academia and also in fiction writing, and obviously they're two completely different things. I had space and a license to tell the stories that I'd heard personally, told to me intimately by people that, you know, strangers and people that I loved also very much, and stories that I know and that I know to be true, but they're obviously fictionalized, but they're a chorus of voices that I have heard over decades. So that's what I needed to decant in this novel. But if I were to write a paper on it, I suppose I'd come undone with sourcing and so on. And what we notice is, so we have the reports that have come out on institution abuse, and the latest one on the two mother and baby home, which, you know, people were and survivors were very upset about the language that was used in the report. And I understand what they're saying about the language, but it's the approved narrative, right? And I think what fiction and art needs to do is it needs to write its own narrative, and it needs to tell the story from wherever you tell a story from. For me, it seems to be a gut sort of reaction when I tell stories and write poems for a very long time. So it's a really, really important, it's invaluable actually, you know, the importance of it, and people identifying with it. And I've noticed people will say to me, well, I didn't like that one, or I did like, and then they'll start to have this full conversation about characters that are fictional. So there's a safety, isn't there? So there's a safety in maybe telling it in this way. I don't know, have I gone way off the point? But I'm just interested in who's allowed to tell a story and who's not allowed to tell a story. And when you start to tell a story that you're not allowed to tell, it becomes very obvious.
And have you had that reaction about the novel? Has there been a sort of a sense in which, or do you think has that passed, the idea that, you know, people should keep these things to themselves, or do you think the novel allows a kind of way in that wouldn't be there? I don't know. Well,
no, that's really
hard to say, but
it's a critical novel nationally, really, isn't it? And that's a very hard thing to do, because and also in an intimate space, it goes against almost the family as well. So you're taking on two holy cows there. So I knew that there'd be a certain hostility. There hasn't actually been. It has been really, really great, the reaction, and I am very grateful for that. And I understand pushback from, I get it more maybe from, you know, readers that I'd meet through book clubs or so on. You know, you get it more that way. Not, it hasn't really come in any other way. But I suppose maybe there is that idea that it's fiction and so on. I think it's a novel that has come very soon after all these things have started to be uncovered. So it's kind of, it's hit at the same time. And I always think that history and time allows a little bit of space for everyone to sort of decompress. And I suppose maybe that hasn't happened with this novel. And, you know, I'm happy that it has worked out this way, to be honest with you. And it's sort of like that banner, isn't it, that we see at all protests around, you know, women's rights and women's bodies. And I mean, you've seen that in the last 2 weeks, very sadly. But, you know, you see those signs with older ladies holding them up, or people, I can't believe we have to protest this shit again. You know, I feel a bit like that with the book. I mean, Edna O'Brien was writing this in the Country Girls. This isn't like reinventing the wheel, like, you know, but it still is a different space, I suppose.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that if there is any discomfort like that, that's a sign of its success, right? That it's kind of, you know, it's nudging people where they need to be nudged. And I think you know, maybe it's a shame that we need to think of academic writing and fiction as such separate spheres, you know, because I think one of the things that's kind of possible to do with, you know, with a report or with official language, kind of ignore it or think that's in black and white, it's kind of in the past. Whereas actually to kind of bring it into the present in a novel, to kind of say, you know, these are people with memories of this right now.
Yeah.
You know, is something that is irrefutable, right? You kind of say, this is a person that you know this person.
Yeah.
So it's not just a sort of history lesson. It's a, you know,
it's living testament in a lot of ways, really, isn't it? Yeah. I know I was probably being unfair. We see, I didn't mean it in such, you know, again, polarizing positions, but I think we are seeing a lot more of it with creative PhDs and so on, which I'm really interested in all that, you know, and I think that that's going to be a very important bridging maybe of these worlds.
Yeah. Well,
that makes sense.
Makes perfect sense. On that note, I mean, I'm aware that now I have revealed myself to be a person with this many post-it notes in your novel. I'm going to open this. I'm going to ask one more question, but while I ask that final question, I will open it up to remind everyone who's here, if they want to ask a question, to thank you, Helen. Keen as mustard in the chat. If you've got a question, you can either stick your name in. If you don't want to say the question aloud, you can write it in the chat box and I'll reveal it. My last question before we go over to that, Elaine, is a kind of fully selfish one, really, because I'm just interested in this, in Irish fiction in particular, is the kind of emoji conversations in the novel, and the, you know, that kind of the realism of that kind of communication, you know. So she sends her sons kind of pictures of vegetables, they send pizza, they send vomit faces or turds. Yeah, no, there's this kind of, and it's obviously it's just capturing the moment, but I mean, is it something, it's just something else, isn't it? It's kind of really another way of, another language, right? Another form of communication.
Absolutely. And it was a very difficult, like I really considered it, and I did discuss with my editor, and we did talk about actual emojis, but we both agreed, no, I wanted to describe the emojis. I don't know why, I just really wanted to describe them. I think but we have definitely learned to communicate quite differently, and I see it as a bit of a positive thing in some ways, because when your kids are smaller and they do start communicating with you first via emojis and text, it's such a loving space, really. And you can see that with Sinead and her mother. The poor mother is sending these emojis. She's like a different person, you know. She's sending like Santa or red hearts or bursting out, and Sinead knows they're all a bit too much, but the poor mother is sending them in place of text. So it's revealing about character as well, I think. Yeah.
My new thesis will be the generational difference of use of emojis in contemporary fiction, coming up soon. Watch this space. Okay, before I get totally carried away, I'm going to hand over to people who have questions. So Helen Cullen, you're up first. Go ahead.
Hello. Hi, Elaine. I'd just love to hear you talk a little bit about the reaction to Sinead as a mother in the novel. I've heard you speaking about this before, and it's never ceases to amaze me how there is so much in this novel that people could get, cross about in terms of their nationhood and so many really important issues. But the thing that they come back to you and ask you about is whether or not Sinead is a bad mother. And I'd love to hear you talk a little bit about that today in the context of the conversation so far.
Yeah, like excellent. And hello, Helen. Lovely to see you. No, it's a great question. She is definitely Marmite, I think, Sinead. But some people have gone so far as to say, you know, I absolutely despised her. She's so cruel. Um, and yeah, I've had various different reactions to her, and like obviously I'm very happy to hand the book to readers, and that's what I should do and forget about it. But it does kind of play on my mind a little bit. And I've gone back through the novel a few times, and she's never actually overtly cruel. She might be slightly neglectful in her presence with the children because she is in hospital with a terminal illness. So I suppose, you know, like it beggars belief to me, but they just didn't find her relatable. They just couldn't warm to her. They couldn't understand how this woman wouldn't consider her children and her husband when she gets the diagnosis. And I mean, I had worked her into the character that she is. So she has had this extremely abusive past, where, you know, with a very, very overbearing father figure, and she's clearly not coping emotionally very, very well in life. But she's stumbling along, I suppose. She's very successful in a business way, and that's fine, and that's her logical brain. But then, you know, when it comes to connecting to her children, she's also had a very early traumatic experience that I don't want to talk about because the people mightn't have read it. And they are really like road marks to how she becomes this detached wife. And I think she's doing it to protect her husband. One woman did say recently, because I've been doing all these book clubs that I was telling Claire about, she said, I think she's utterly selfless and she's so courageous. And I nearly started crying. I was like, yes, this is how I feel. But then, you know, others said, no, she's really selfish. I suppose that's the moral dilemma of the book, isn't it? And how do we look at motherhood and what kind of icons? I know you've written a brilliant piece on this, Helen, and it's so good. Holding the Irish mother, and it's probably all mothers, and we just did it in the Irish context, but holding this mother to these ridiculous standards. We've all done it. I actually had a conversation with my own mother about it, and she said, yeah, moral standards, you know, their ability within the family and so on. And it's upsetting, actually. So I like to see complicated mothers because they're just people, and people are complicated. Did I answer it?
Yeah, I mean, that is so fascinating to me because in so many ways she's the ultimate Irish mother, right? She suffers in perfect silence, right? She just, you know, she takes to her bed. She doesn't kind of drag the children into this kind of performance of grief, and you know, you could see it completely the other way, I think.
Yeah, precisely. And you're absolutely right, because what does she tell them? She hasn't accepted it herself, if she ever is going to. And also that brings me back to the question of, if we have autonomy of our bodies, everybody, every person, so that has to, you know, extend out to this position. It can't be just you can have autonomy over this, but you can't actually have autonomy over that, you know. So it's definitely a moral dilemma. But you know, I don't see her, I see her as she's doing a good job. That's how I see it. Nobody's perfect.
Absolutely. There are two questions in the chat, Elaine. I will just put them to you as well. So Renu says that she's asking if you can recommend any books that write about Irish life, particularly for women in the 1960s, and she's interested in this experiences of Irish women who had to give up their babies. Are there any suggestions that you can give there, or?
She's interested, sorry, say that again, Claire, I broke up, I think.
Sorry. In general, I think she's looking at the experience, particularly around the 1960s, of Irish women who had to give up their babies. So these might be more autobiographies or other novels that you can think of where this has been a theme. I mean, it would have been
Helen might throw in on this. That's a great question. I'm trying to think. I'm thinking of Mary Costello's novel. And it's not, imagine it's not jumping out at me. It probably should be. There's probably loads of them. I know there's a new Mel O'Doherty novel that I have yet to read, called Fallen. I think it's going to deal with this, but I have yet to read that novel. No, I can't. I should know. I'm thinking of McGowan's novels, but I can't. Yeah. Mary Costello's Academy Street. Yeah, Martina.
Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah.
Martina, if you think of anything else, put it in. Not specifically, not absolutely, even though, yeah, come a cropper on that one.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I suppose there's the kind of, this is a very obvious, not in fiction so much, but in film, I suppose we can think of more examples. But
sorry, just Grania Lynch is after saying non-fiction. Keelan Hogan's Republic of Shame is absolutely brilliant book, out with Penguin, and it's non-fiction, but it deals with all of this. Sorry, I was thinking more in the fictional. And Anne-Marie Caron's Blood Rot is an excellent book of poetry that would deal with this as well. Martina Callanan is on fire here. She said Philomena.
I mean, yeah.
Yeah. Thanks,
yeah,
Martina.
Brilliant, thank you. Emily Horton, who is the programme lead for English at Brunel, has given us a great question here about this overlap with the, our kind of current situation. So the setting in hospital, the concern with illness, online technologies. I mean, you couldn't have known this, I don't think, at the time of writing it. It has all of this, this resonance now. Emily's pointing out that students keep asking if we think there'll be a new genre of pandemic literature, and will your novel fall into that? Because I mean, the time of publication, the kind of reading of it now, it's kind of impossible, isn't it, for readers to not make.
Yeah, but it was just exactly what you said. I had obviously no clue. It was printed before. It was actually last St. Patrick's Day we were discussing whether we'd hold it back or not. It was ready to go onto the shelves. It's going to be impossible for it not to have an effect. It's like, is your writing political? Well, all writing is political. After this, it'll be post-pandemic. It's going to be, it'll be like postmodernism, I feel. It's going to be that big because it's a global thing, and I don't think anything's quite so huge has happened, but I don't think we've processed it in any way. And I think obviously the styles and processing will be completely different. I had a kind of an inclination towards something pandemic, and then I kind of dipped back out of it again. I don't know. Personally, it's something that I haven't been able to process whatsoever. I'm writing fiction at the moment, but I haven't been able to write poetry, and I notice that's because the world is in turmoil and I don't know where the ground is. I mean, if I don't know where the ground is, I can't write a poem. I always find that. It has to be some piece of non-fiction or a piece of fiction, but poetry won't work for me. So I just don't know how people are going to respond to it. I think we'll want to run away from it and never revisit it, but that won't work either. That's denial. I don't know. Does anybody else want to row in on that? Even yourself, Claire, what do you think?
Well, I mean, in terms of your novel, it makes me think that there'll be all of these novels set in hospitals that seem a kind of paradise where visitors can just wander in and out, and there's no concern at all about kind of how many people are sitting by the bed.
It was meant to be very bleak, but now it actually looks kind of like a utopia, really, sadly.
Yeah, from me, I just cut a final chapter from my book that's coming out in June that dealt with the lockdown, because there was a general feeling that actually no one's going to read it. It's the last thing anyone wants to read, and we can't yet know really how it will kind of pan out. So you can't capture it yet. Really.
That's it. I think it's too soon. I was trying to be ambitious, but it wasn't a good idea. It is too soon. I think it'll be 5 years, I think, before anyone will be able to reflect. But that shouldn't necessarily be the way if someone wants to respond artistically. I think absolutely, But I think it'll be in other forms for a while. Photography, maybe art, visual art. I think the writing might come a bit later. I think we're all in a bit of shock. I think we need time out and just to process things. And I don't know about you guys, but we've been in lockdown. I'm literally, I think I've been out 4 times in 12 months.
Yeah. I'm just going to say, in the chat, for anyone who is following, Martina is just kind of giving a bibliography.
She's a legend.
That is just incredible.
She's my brain tonight.
So, everyone keep a close eye on that. There's a question from Lynette McIntyre who's saying, did you give up on writing poetry when you were writing the novel? So you haven't gone back to it right now, but was it kind of, is it two brains or?
Yeah, I've often heard it said, you kind of sit around and musing and waiting for the poem to come along. It sounds very beautiful. Where with the novel, you just sit down every day, like, you know, and like you have to go for your daily walk, and you're just like, so I have to wait for a moment. And actually, I really think that I need to travel to write poetry. So I really need to be fired up by a conversation. So it doesn't matter where the conversation is happening. And the poem might have absolutely nothing to do with it, but the rhythm of speech of people talking or travel or seeing something different, that's what really starts me now with poems. I don't necessarily need to do that for fiction. It's a different thing. I think it's a totally different task to me, actually. But no, I haven't given up completely. I do have a few empty moleskin notebooks that I'm hoping optimistically I'll fill.
Buying the notebook is really 50% of the work, isn't it? So you've done that much.
Buying the notebook and a bottle of absinthe.
Exactly. What more do people want? Yeah, that's fantastic. Anyone else in the not in the chat who wants to kind of ask a question? We're kind of coming to the end of our hour, but you know, Colette has made a suggestion that also that listening to the audiobook is a great suggestion. I'm just so nerdy now. I'm going to confess I've done both, guys. I mean,
so have I.
You know, I don't want to look like, you know, Elaine Stalker on another platform, but here we are. That's where I am.
She's great. Siobhan O'Kelly actually narrates it, and she actually acted on some Ken Brune TV, the Jack Taylor series, and I loved her on that. So when I heard her voice, I knew immediately she was closely aligned to mine, I thought.
Look, Colette has two. This is good. This is turning into your fan club now with all these people who are owning up.
I could do with this.
to the full works. I guess maybe just a sort of summing up kind of question, just a sort of practice-based question, really. So you've said to us about that need to be in the world, really, for kind of writing poetry, and the opposite maybe being true when you're writing fiction, that it's that business of getting down and sitting at the desk. Are there any, I don't know, kind of tips or ways of thinking that are useful for any aspiring writers, any of our students in the audience that could, look, Brenna's jumping in with the same question.
Do you know, just as you were saying that now, I actually realised that if I'm writing fiction, I like my characters to talk out loud to each other, and I do that, obviously. They don't actually appear. So I'm thinking that that's probably why I need the quieter space to think that, so I'm hearing their voices anyway. So maybe I need to hear other people for the poems. So I think it's about finding the places that fire your mind is a really good idea. Obviously I was locked in a hospital, so I had no choice, and then I decanted all the sounds that I had heard. So maybe not that one. I find, not to sound pompous, but I do find art galleries really useful. I just find pictures, visual art where there's a story maybe that could be told. I find that really good as an impulse for me, or a catalyst for me to write. I suppose reading other books, but the bottom line is, and I say this all the time, it depends on how much you want to tell a story and how much you want to write. And at the end of the day, there is a time where you have to stop. I mean, the amount of books that comes into this house, it's a obscene
really?
habit at this stage. My husband is like, I don't think, you know, if you read a book every day till the day you die, you're going to get all these read. And I'm like, I know. But I think there is a time that you have to stop. And I mean, I procrastinate by continuing to read and research and say I haven't enough done. But there's a time you have to stop, and you have to sit down, and you have to just start to write, and you have to just get into some habit. And it doesn't matter if you're writing in your bed, or sitting on the roof of the house, or in the bathroom, or at a fancy desk. And it doesn't matter what you wear. And none of that matters. What matters is that you're putting words down, and that you have something that you want to say, I suppose, and that you want to get down. And I that's not an easy way of saying that. There's no easy way, I don't think, in writing. It's kind of like a form of torture. So good luck, everybody.
Yeah. I mean, I think amen to the kind of breaking this idea of there being ideal writing conditions, right? I think all that myth can be dispelled, the better for everyone, really. That kind of waiting for the log cabin It's going to be a long old wait for everybody.
I'm a while waiting now
Yeah.
for a rich patron, but you know, I'm still here.
You never know. So top tips, everyone.
To James Joyce.
Yeah. Order too many books or become admitted to hospital. These are your choices for inspiration, really. But
a small group of good friends or writers can work if you have someone to share the work with. But like obviously if you're going to share your work, they will share back with you. So it has to be that sort of co-op. I love the idea of co-ops in all facets of life. But I think a cooperative writing group where you're all maybe at the same level, and it's a good one where there's, you know, it's not going to destroy you, it's going to, you know, help you, is a good idea, I think.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Elaine, thank you so much for talking to us this evening. It's been just an absolute pleasure.
Oh no, thank you so much, Claire.
For your work. I mean, is there any kind of sneak hint on what the next novel is going to be that we could have, or is that too much to ask?
A very quiet one. That's going to cause no trouble.
That sounds like.
No, I'm only joking. No, that will never happen. I can't help but to drop.
Right. Try and sneak in an emoji just for me. That will just.
I will, I promise. Yeah.
Keep me in business.
Yeah. No, thanks so much, Claire, and for your really good questions. They were the Google ones, especially.
My pleasure. My pleasure.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Okay.
Really good to speak to you. I think I can see lots of people giving you kind of some comments in the chat, so I'll hang on for a sec while they're doing that. But I think everyone, we will call that the official end. So thank you so much. It was really a great pleasure.
Bye. You too. Bye.